The room of secrets. The room was thick with heat and secrecy, a place where time seemed to stand still, and the outside world faded into a distant hum. The air clung to the scent of sweat and fading perfume, a bittersweet reminder of the moments that had just unfolded. The city beyond the window buzzed softly, its lights flickering like distant stars, indifferent to the chaos within these four walls. I lay there tangled in the sheets, my body still humming from the fire we had just ignited. My skin felt alive, every nerve ending tingling with the aftershocks of passion. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing, a storm of guilt, desire, and the crushing weight of my choices. Then my phone buzzed. The sound was sharp, cutting through the haze like a knife. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the device, already knowing what I'd see. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder of the life I was betraying. Slowly, I turned the screen toward me. "Where are you? I'm waiting." "My husband." I swallowed hard, the guilt clawing at my chest, threatening to suffocate me. Beside me, Ken shifted lazily, his hand tracing slow, deliberate circles along my back. His touch was warm, familiar, and yet it sent a shiver down my spine. "Again?" he murmured, his voice thick with amusement. "You're not going to answer, are you?" I didn't respond. What was there to say? That I hated myself for this? That I swore every time would be the last? That I had rehearsed my excuses so well, I almost believed them myself? Ken smirked, his fingers tilting my chin so I'd face him. His lips hovered close, teasing, tempting. "You should stay," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. I exhaled, steadying myself. "I can't." But I didn't move. Not yet. Not until I felt his fingers skim lower. Not until his lips brushed against my neck, sending a shiver down my spine. Not until I realized I was dangerously close to surrendering again. With a force of will I didn't know I still possessed, I sat up, wrapping the sheet around me. The room suddenly felt colder, the warmth of his body replaced by a chilling emptiness. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, staring at the floor as if it held the answers I refused to face. "You always leave," Ken murmured behind me, his voice low and knowing. "But you always come back." I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the silk of my dress. A bitter smile ghosted across my lips. "Maybe one day I won't." Ken chuckled, the sound low and confident. "You will." The ride home. The ride home felt longer than usual, the city lights flickering past in a blur. Each one was a reminder of the life I was returning to. The husband who was waiting, the lies I had to tell, and the worst part. I wasn't sure which life felt more like the lie. The one I lived in the daylight, or the one I escaped to in the shadows. I pulled into the driveway, cutting the engine and sitting there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as if it could anchor me. My heartbeat had slowed, but the guilt hadn't faded. It never did. It only buried itself deeper, waiting for the quiet moments to claw its way back to the surface. The porch light was on. He was still awake. I inhaled sharply, straightening my dress and wiping away the last traces of Ken's touch. My fingers found my wedding ring in the cup holder, cool against my skin as I slid it back onto my finger. A perfect circle, like the cycle I couldn't seem to break. I stepped inside, the familiar creak of the door echoing in the silence. Nathan was sitting on the couch, his laptop open but forgotten. He looked up the moment I closed the door. "Late night," he said, his voice calm, but his eyes were searching. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, work ran over, and I grabbed a drink with some colleagues. I should have texted." It was effortless now, lying. The words slipped from my lips like second nature, smooth and practiced. And that scared me more than anything. Nathan studied me for a moment longer, then sighed, rubbing his temples. I was worried. Guilt twisted in my stomach, sharp and unforgiving. He wasn't accusing me. He wasn't angry. He was just concerned. And somehow, that made it worse. "I'm sorry," I said softly, walking over to him. I leaned down, pressing a kiss to his forehead. He smelled like home, like comfort, stability. Things I should have cherished but had somehow learned to betray. He smiled up at me, tired but warm. "Come to bed," I nodded. "Just let me freshen up first." The bathroom mirror. I walked into the bathroom and shut the door, locking it behind me. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror, the weight of my choices etched into my face. I turned on the sink, letting the cold water rush over my hands as if I could wash away what I had done. But no matter how hard I scrubbed, the stain remained. I stood there for a long time, gripping the edges of the sink, my breath unsteady. The cold water ran over my fingers, but it did nothing to cool the heat of guilt burning beneath my skin. I had to stop this. I told myself that after every time. But every time, I found my way back to Ken. I turned off the faucet, watching the last drop slip down the drain before straightening up. My eyes met my reflection again. Lips slightly swollen, skin still tingling where he had touched me. I reached up, rubbing my neck, erasing the last traces of him. Nathan trusted me, and I was shattering that trust with every lie, every stolen moment. I exhaled slowly, forcing my expression into something neutral before stepping back into the bedroom. Nathan was already in bed, one arm draped over his forehead, his breathing deep and steady. I climbed in beside him, careful not to disturb him. But as I settled against my pillow, his voice broke through the darkness. "You've been different lately." My body tensed. "What do you mean?" A pause, then he turned his head slightly toward me. "I don't know. Just distant." I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. Was this it? Was this the moment everything unraveled? I forced a soft chuckle, rolling onto my side to face him. "Work has been exhausting. You know how it is." Nathan studied me, his eyes searching for something. For the truth, maybe. But I had become too good at hiding it. After a moment, he sighed and reached for my hand, threading his fingers through mine. "I miss you, Amara." Something in my chest cracked, just a little. "I'm right here," I whispered, squeezing his hand. He gave me a small smile before closing his eyes. Within minutes, his breathing evened out again, drifting into sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trapped between the life I had and the one I couldn't let go of. And I knew deep down that this was only the calm before the storm. The tightrope. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope, each step more precarious than the last. I told myself I wouldn't see Ken again, that I would stop before it was too late. But that was the thing about addiction. It never let go so easily. It started with a text. "I miss you." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. I should have deleted it, blocked his number, done something, anything to sever the connection. But instead, I typed back 3 words that sealed my fate. "I miss you too." That was all it took. The next night I was back in his apartment, the door barely closing behind me before his hands were on my waist, his mouth claiming mine. I let myself drown in him again, in the heat, in the escape. But this time something was different. This time I felt the weight of it pressing heavier against my chest. The guilt was no longer a distant whisper. It was a scream, clawing at me even as I fell deeper into Ken's arms. Afterward, as I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, my phone vibrated again. A message from Nathan. "We need to talk." A chill ran through me, my stomach twisting painfully. Ken must have noticed because he propped himself up on one elbow, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "What is it?" he asked. I shook my head, locking my phone and placing it face down on the nightstand. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. And as I lay there, my heart pounding in my chest, I realized something terrifying. The storm I had been dreading wasn't coming. It was already here. The confrontation. The drive home felt different this time. Heavier. The streetlights stretched into streaks of gold and white as I sped through the city, my fingers gripping the wheel too tightly. Nathan's message echoed in my head. "We need to talk." It wasn't a question. It wasn't casual. It carried weight. Had he found out? Had I left something behind? A scent, a trace, a change in my pattern? Guilt had a way of shifting things. How I kissed him, how I spoke, how I touched him. Maybe he had noticed. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my pulse was hammering in my ears. The house was dark except for the faint glow from the living room. He was waiting. I stepped inside, my breath shallow. Nathan was sitting on the couch, elbows resting on his knees, fingers steepled together. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Hey," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. He just studied me, as if peeling back my skin, searching for whatever I was hiding. Then he motioned to the seat across from him. "Sit." I hesitated, but I obeyed, lowering myself onto the couch. My hands felt clammy, my heart slamming against my ribs. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Nathan exhaled slowly. "I know, Amara." The room tilted. My stomach lurched. My mouth opened, but no words came. I wanted to deny it, to feign ignorance, to spin another lie. But I couldn't. Not when his eyes held the truth so firmly. "I've known for a while," he continued, his voice calm. Too calm. At first I didn't want to believe it. I convinced myself it was just my imagination. But then, the late nights, the distance, the way you stopped looking at me the same way. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. It all added up. A lump formed in my throat. "Nathan, I don't—" He interrupted, his voice sharp but not angry. Just tired. "Don't lie to me, Amara. Not now." The silence between us stretched, heavy and suffocating. My fingers dug into my lap, my heart slamming against my ribs. "I wanted to ask you," he continued, his voice softer now. "Why?" The question cut deeper than I expected. Why? Because I had been searching for something I couldn't name. Because Ken made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Because I had convinced myself I could have both lives without consequence. But I said none of that. Instead, I whispered, "I don't know." Nathan's lips pressed into a thin line. He nodded as if that answer was the final confirmation he needed. "I loved you," he said finally, the past tense shattering something inside me. A tear slipped down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. Nathan stood, running a hand down his face. "I deserve better than this. And you need to figure out what you really want." I opened my mouth to speak, to plead, to say something that would fix this. But the look in his eyes told me it was already too late. He turned away, walking toward the hallway, toward the bedroom we once shared. I sat there frozen, listening to the sound of a door closing behind him. And for the first time, the weight of my choices came crashing down all at once. The storm had passed, but all that was left was ruin. The aftermath, I sat in the silence, staring at the spot where Nathan had just stood. The weight of his words, of everything I had done, settling on me like a heavy, suffocating fog. I wanted to go after him, to say something, anything, that would make him turn back. But what could I say? That I was sorry? That I didn't mean for this to happen? That I still loved him? Because the truth was, none of that mattered now. I stayed on the couch for what felt like hours, replaying everything in my mind. The first time I met Ken, the first time I crossed the line, every moment that had led to this, every lie, every betrayal, every choice I had convinced myself was harmless. But this wasn't harmless. This was destruction. The sun was rising by the time I finally stood. The house was eerily quiet, and I knew without having to check that Nathan was gone. I walked to the bedroom, his closet door open, and in the space where his clothes had once hung, there was nothing but empty hangers, swinging slightly as if disturbed by a breeze that no longer existed. I sank onto the edge of the bed, pressing my face into my hands. This was the ending I had never prepared for. Ken's name flashed across my phone screen, a fresh message waiting to be opened. I stared at it, then without hesitation I deleted it. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't reaching for him, because now I finally understood. The thrill, the passion, the fire, it had all been an illusion. And now that the flames had burned out, all that remained was the cold, empty truth. I had lost the one thing that truly mattered, and this time, there was no going back.